In this video, we're going to look at some common fuel saving myths, some things that people believe are true, but they aren't. You won't get substantial fuel economy. And I found that some of these myths exist because they used to be true. The way cars and engines used to work required you to do certain things, but that doesn't always apply on modern engines. And some of these things are just down to clever marketing claims made by people selling these things that will save you fuel. So after this video, you'll have a complete overview on which fuel saving things work. And if it's a myth that's originated from a situation that we needed to do years ago, you'll understand why and how things have changed. One of the most common things that people often say is to overinflate your tyres because that will save you fuel. Now, that's come from an understanding that underinflated tyres waste fuel. In fact, some estimates are that a 5 psi loss in tyre pressure can result in a 2% loss of fuel economy. But what happens when you go beyond the correct pressure? Well, your tyre stops being flat, it starts being curved, so you've got less rolling resistance. That may well reduce your fuel consumption because you're rolling on much narrower tyres, but that's going to adversely affect the handling of the car. The braking, the cornering are going to be dangerously affected depending on how extreme you've actually gone. But also the life of the tyre. You'll notice that tyres that are overinflated wear in the middle very, very quickly. So the cost of replacing your tyres more often will usually outweigh any of those minor fuel savings you've had. Plus you've had the additional problems of the handling compromises that you've made in order to achieve that. It's better overall, if you're really that worried about the friction of the tyres, to source energy efficient tyres. Your results are going to vary depending on your car, the tyre size and your driving style. You may not see any benefits at all going to an eco tyre. Now, also related to tyres is filling them with nitrogen. Nitrogen molecules are bigger. They're less likely to dissipate. So it's a good way of maintaining pressure in your tyre over a period of time. But is it really worth filling your car's tyres with nitrogen? Well, bear in mind that air, the compressed air that goes into your tyre, already contains about 78% nitrogen. So we're only talking about that 22% difference. Now, when you go back to your tyre after a few months, it's lost some air pressure. Now, it's predominantly the oxygen molecules that have evaporated or escaped through the walls of the tyre. So you're replacing those oxygen molecules with another 78% of nitrogen, 22% of oxygen. So as time goes on, you're going to be left with a higher concentration of nitrogen in your tyre anyway. Will it make a difference? Is nitrogen lighter? Well, in the grand scheme of things, you're really wasting your time. In a competition environment, every little thing you can do to improve the car's performance or handling or to maintain consistent pressures as the tyres heat up, they will go to great lengths to achieve that. So you may well see motorsport teams using nitrogen, but for the cost involved and the benefits you'll get, it's a complete waste of time. People often say that driving slower on the highways, the motorways, the freeways will save you fuel. Now, that's true to an extent. We know that if you travel at 70 or 80 miles an hour, you're going to use far more fuel than if you travel at 50 or 60 miles an hour. But that doesn't always relate to the very low end. So if you were dribbling along at 30 miles an hour or less than that, there's very little drag affecting the car. So many would say that that improves the fuel economy, but your journey times are going to be much longer. Cars are typically designed with a power band, and generally manufacturers have optimized the speed of around 50 to 60 miles an hour for fuel economy purposes. So if you drive at that speed in the correct gear, you're going to make more savings than driving at stupidly low speeds, annoying all of the other drivers. Yes, it's true that the faster you go, the more fuel you use, but it doesn't practically correlate to going much slower, bringing great increases in fuel economy. So as long as you avoid those extremely high speeds where you're dealing with a lot more wind resistance, you're going to see a fuel saving. So another thing people say is that using the air conditioning wastes fuel. You'll notice when the air conditioner cuts in on a car, it saps power. You feel that the car's less responsive when that air conditioning cuts in. So that leads people to conclude that using the air conditioning is wasting fuel. Now, two things to think about. The other option, if you're in the car on a hot day, you can either treat it like a sauna, dress appropriately and have a cold shower every sort of 10 or 15 minutes, or you can open the window. Now, if you open the window on a car that's traveling at speed, the increased drag that you create is going to cost you fuel economy. So in most cases, in most instances, in that situation, it is better to have the windows closed and the air conditioner on. Now, the mistake a lot of people make is to turn the air conditioning right down. So if you've got climate control and you can set a temperature in your car, it's generally best to set it to just be below ambient. And if it's got a recirculation mode, that can also reduce the strain on the air conditioner. So fuel additives improve your mileage that you get, your fuel economy. Well, in the main, most additives don't make that much of a difference to your fuel economy. And a lot of additives actually work by cleaning the injectors. So if the injectors aren't spraying cleanly into the engine, you're going to be down on fuel economy. The engine is going to be less efficient. But a lot of these additives just restore the fuel economy to where it should be. But most of the fuel that we buy has already got additives in it that are designed to clean the fuel system in the car to keep it running efficiently. Depending on where you buy the fuel, it depends on what additive pack is in that fuel. But generally, the more expensive fuels and the premium brands that you go to will have a very good additive selection in there. Years ago, when you had a carburetor and things were a bit more clunky, you probably saw a little bit more of an improvement with these additives. But in a modern engine, everything's computer controlled. You've effectively got a lab controlling the burn inside a modern engine. So it's unlikely that fuel additives will make that much of a difference. So that brings us to octane. Higher octane fuel means you get better fuel economy. Well, again, that's a sort of myth for some people, but it's true for others. It depends on the engine you've got. So generally speaking, if you have a direct injection, high compression engine or a turbocharged engine, you'll generally see that they have been designed to run on higher octane fuels. If the engine has been designed for higher octane fuel, you will generally see more power and better fuel economy. But for those of you that are driving a car that hasn't been optimized for high octane fuel, you are wasting your money. You're not going to see any benefit at all from that more expensive fuel. And think as well about the cost. You may get more fuel economy, but are you paying more per mile? Look at that cost per mile. Factor that in when you do your calculation. If the high octane fuel has a higher cost per mile, you may as well use the lower octane fuel if it's safe to do so in your engine, obviously. Another myth we hear is that filling up in the morning saves gas. So the idea is that the gas, the petrol, the diesel that we put into our tank is colder, so you get more for your money. Kind of makes sense when you think about it like that, but the reality is that the fuel is under the ground in a storage tank. Temperatures under the ground tend to be fairly stable, whatever the temperature above ground is. So the fuel is not necessarily that much colder. So the benefits on that one are certainly very, very questionable. Idling to warm up the engine. Idling is what people do in very, very cold climates. They need to get some heat into the engine. But it's generally much better to just put the engine under a little bit of load. Hold the accelerator very slightly. So if it's idling at 1000 RPM, you press the accelerator to 1100, 1200, depending on the overall rev range of your engine. You certainly don't want to be pushing it too hard when that engine is cold. But that will bring the engine up to temperature much more quickly, and you have the potential for less problems. Oil dilution is always a bit of a problem when you're in that warm-up phase, when everything in the engine is cold and not properly bedded in. Idling to warm up your engine is generally not a great idea. There's other ways. Manual transmission saves fuel, automatic transmission waste fuel. Well, again, over the years, things have changed dramatically. We're talking about transmissions back then that had a torque converter, maybe 3 gears. That is going to be very wasteful compared to a 4-speed manual gearbox with an overdrive. But modern automatics have come a long way. We've got dual clutch systems. We've got 7 or 8 gears now becoming a standard on automatic boxes. The gear changes are instantaneous. The computer controlling the gear selection is becoming cleverer and smarter, and it's able to maintain better fuel economy than most drivers selecting the manual gears themselves. So while a manual transmission may appear to give better fuel economy, the modern robot controlled automatics, the Tiptronics, the S-tronics and similar gearboxes from other manufacturers go a long way to maximizing the fuel economy. Most people get fairly near to the manufacturer's claimed economy figures if they drive gently and let the Autobox do its thing. But that's obviously going to depend very much on your driving style. But again, people say the lighter the car, the more weight you shed, the greater the fuel economy. So that's kind of true. If you've got lots of things in your car and it's weighing the car down, the car's got to overcome that inertia. But the reality is that in the main, you won't see that much of a difference going silly. So when people start choosing lighter screws, drilling holes in subframes, using lighter components, carbon fiber panels and that sort of thing just to save fuel economy, you've generally outweighed the cost of the fuel saving in the long term by the parts that you've bought that are lighter, and you've made the car more noisy. Removing sound deadening is one of the things that people do to save weight in a car, and you've got to think about the practicality of it. So there are limits. Don't carry around half a ton of scrap metal in the back of the car just because it's there and you couldn't be bothered to clear it out. So that would be wasteful. But going silly and starting to look at tiny little things, taking out pieces of paper and pens in order to save fuel, that's starting to go to the extreme, and you're not really going to see any benefit at all by going to those extremes. Another fuel economy myth is that electric cars are cheaper in terms of fuel. Now, that's got some elements of truth. If you can charge at home and you've got an economy tariff, you're going to be making a saving. It's generally cheaper to use that electricity at that cheap price than it would be to put fuel, petrol, diesel, gasoline, whatever you call it, into your car. But if you're public charging, if you're relying on the charge network around the country, for most drivers and in most areas, that can prove to be very expensive, and more so than the conventional fuels. Even if you're relying on the economy tariffs at home, you might find you need to charge it for a longer period than you actually get through that economy period. So a 30-mile top-up charge can take about 3 hours on a domestic 3-pin plug. 24 hours would be needed for a full charge. So if you're only doing 20 to 30 miles a day, you can just top it up and you've got a fairly short recharge time. Obviously, if you use a higher kilowatt charger, you're going to reduce those charge times. But even on a 7.4 kilowatt charge, a full charge in many electric cars is still going to take you 7 hours. So that'll usually push you well outside of these economy tariffs that are provided. So think as well about the mileage you do, because that's a bearing. So that's sort of true for some drivers in some situations that are doing low mileage and they can top their car up at home. But generally, if you're relying on the public charge network, it usually proves to be more expensive to drive an electric car. So believing these common myths and perpetuating them is not really helping anyone. It's better to maintain a steady speed, to concentrate on good anticipation on driving style. Please boot the like button, that really does help us to get out there. I've lined this video up for you, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so, because we'd hate you to miss out on all the great content we've got coming up to help you get the best out of your car and extract every drop of performance and distance out of the fuel that you use. See you in this next video. Thanks for watching.